Hello and welcome to Maggie Mumbles. My name is Maggie, and on this channel I mumble about the things that are interesting to me. I am doing a series where I'm reacting to past videos of myself when I did the Enwitching Challenge in 2018. I am also right now in the middle of a three-part series within that where I'm reacting to day 2 of that challenge. I had a lot to say. It turned into a very long video that I have decided to break up into 3 parts. So this is part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, I talked about my definitions of what is a witch, what is witchcraft, and what is magic. And part 2, we're beginning to look at the myths and misconceptions surrounding witchcraft and how I have changed or still believe what I talked about almost 5 years ago. So if that sounds interesting to you, make sure that you like this video, you are subscribed to this channel, and that you hit the bell for notifications so that you are notified every time I post a new video. Without further ado, I'm going to give it over to Maggie from the past, where I already reacted to these things, and I'll see you at the end of the video. The first myth that I've heard is that you have to be trained by another witch. And this, I think, stems from very specific traditions that require a mentor and a mentee, someone to guide you in your training. And I think it's definitely really helpful to be trained by a more experienced person in any aspect of life, anything that you're trying to learn. It's nice to have someone who's been through it before and can help you and guide you and give you resources that are trusted. And that's why people like me, who are bloggers and other witchcraft bloggers and YouTubers and things like that, have our blogs, because it's kind of a way to teach a bunch of people all at once without having that one-on-one relationship. And I do think that having somebody to guide you and to teach you, it gives you confidence and it gives you more power, because confidence builds your power. When you feel confident in yourself, you feel more confident in your abilities. But that power is inside you, and you don't need, it's not necessary to have someone train you. So if you've heard that you have to be trained by a more experienced witch in order to learn witchcraft, that's a myth. You can learn it through your own studies, your own practice, your own experiences. You don't have to have somebody to teach you, but it is more helpful. So that myth might have come from the idea that it is helpful to have a witch guide you, but it's, again, not necessary. Yeah, I agree with everything I don't think any of my beliefs surrounding this have changed. I do think that having somebody teach you is really helpful, and whether that's through reading a blog, watching YouTube videos, reading books, practicing in a coven, learning one-on-one with somebody, however you're guided, it is very helpful to have somebody else who's like kind of been through it before. And I think that one thing I would want to add to this is that if you are looking to be trained by somebody else, to have sort of a one-on-one mentorship, it's really important to make sure that you've researched this person and that, you know, maybe talk to other students. Now, a few years after this video has come out, I have heard of a lot of people who have entered into these mentorship programs, and it's not a good experience. Especially now, it seems like there's been a boom of like coaching, witchcraft coaching and things like that, and it's really expensive. What you get isn't what is promised. There are ethical people who teach witchcraft one-on-one or in group settings, so I'm not saying that it's like everywhere or everyone is like this, but there have been enough of these experiences that I've heard of that it's at least worth mentioning, I think, in order to keep people safe, to not perpetuate the scams. And additionally, I also think it's really important to make sure that people are, you know, learning from other people and learning from a lot of other people. So, you know, maybe you really enjoy the way a writer writes and you like the way they explain things, but making sure that that's supplemented with other writers, opening yourself up to other perspectives and not just only sticking with one person, what they say on their blog and their YouTube channel or their books or whatever it is. That's one way to help protect you from what could be a cult. If you close yourself down from learning from multiple people and you think of one person as the end-all be-all, it may end up that that person turns out to be a cult leader and then you're brainwashed into a cult without really thinking that that was going to happen, or brainwashed into like a conspiracy theory that isn't true, because that can happen as well if you just follow one person and they happen to believe in a conspiracy theory and you believe everything they say. All of a sudden you believe all these conspiracy theories. So I think that that's an important addition to this myth and misconception. You don't need to be trained by another witch. You can be if you want to, but you can also just learn from yourself, from your own experiences, and just trying whatever feels right. And then if you do want to be trained by somebody, making sure that you research them and you keep yourself safe. You don't have to be initiated either, unless you are joining a tradition. Like some Wiccan covens require initiation and a certain level of knowledge to mark your competency and to continue on to different levels. If you're not joining that kind of tradition where you have to pass certain tests to get to the next level, then you don't have to be initiated unless you want to. I did my own self-initiation ceremony for myself because I felt like it was important for my own growth, and I know a lot of other witches do this as well. But it's not, you don't have to initiate yourself. You don't have to have an initiation ceremony unless it's something that you feel is important to your practice. So there are lots of solitary witches who don't mark their introduction to witchcraft in any way, or just mark it in their journal as like, this is the day I decided I was a witch. Or doing simple rituals every so often to mark where you are. Maybe you feel like you've really mastered tarot on this day and you can mark that with a ceremony, but you don't have to do that. You can do it, you don't have to. I still agree with all of that, that if you want to, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. I'd kind of forgotten about that little advice about marking various moments where you reach different milestones in your goals. If you want to learn about the tarot and you do a little celebration when you feel confident with like the suit of wands or something like that. Initiation definitely came out of some of the groups like Wicca, which comes from other traditions like Freemasonry and things, so there's a little bit of that element in the religion of Wicca. But if you don't follow Wicca, if you don't follow a tradition that requires it, then yeah, you don't need to be initiated. Another myth is that witches are all female. And in this group, we know that that's not true. We have plenty of men, maybe not as many as there are women, but you don't have to be a woman to be a witch. There are male witches, there are non-binary witches, there are trans witches, there are gender non-conforming witches. Anything else you can be, whatever you are. Witchcraft is for everybody, and it doesn't matter. It's genderless. Magic is genderless. Witchcraft is genderless. I think this myth comes from the history of witchcraft and women, because women have often throughout history tapped into their power through witchcraft to subvert the system that has oppressed them. And this happens with other minorities as well. There are different minority groups that have a similar relationship between oppression and witchcraft, but it is a myth that you have to be female to be a witch. There's no gender involved there. Also agree with this one still. There's no gender involved in witchcraft, and the history of witchcraft is related to various experiences of oppression throughout history. It's often something that is tapped into, like I said, when an oppressive regime is trying to put down the power of the minority that is being oppressed. The only thing I would add here, since I brought up kitchen witchcraft in that previous video, is a shameless plug for my new book, The Kitchen Witch's Guide to Healing and Self-Care. And I actually do mention that in one of the very first sections about kitchen witchcraft. Finally, gender identity doesn't dictate who can or cannot practice kitchen witchcraft. Caring for your home and your family is a genderless act. And I think that that also applies to just the idea of witchcraft in general. Knowing what your power is and knowing what you want out of life is not gender specific. Any human can know their power and direct that power towards the desired outcome. So I think that sentiment holds true as well. The next thing is that you do not have to have a history or a lineage of witchcraft in your ancestry to be a witch. This is one of those gatekeeper things that I feel like is super unnecessary, and I'm not really sure why it came to be. There are definitely certain traditions and that are rooted in the heritage of a family and you might not be invited into that if you're not part of that family, but it doesn't extend to all of witchcraft. It just is that family's traditions that you wouldn't necessarily be allowed to partake in. So this always reminds me, a lot of things remind me of Harry Potter, but this one specifically reminds me of Harry Potter with the whole pure blood thing. And if you're not familiar with the Harry Potter series, then for one thing, I suggest you read it because it's awesome. But you can just ignore me for now. But there's this idea that the pure blood witches, the witches who were and wizards who are born from a pure blood family, should be the only ones who can practice and learn witchcraft and wizardry. And then there's what's called a muggle born, which is someone who is born to non-magical parents, and they shouldn't be allowed to practice. And I don't think that that's fair, because that's not, anyone can tap into their power, because everyone has this power. So why would it be tied to who your family is or your heritage or anything like that? So at this time, a lot of people already knew that J.K. Rowling was a TERF and was a trans exclusionary radical feminist, if you don't know what a TERF is, and had a lot of other problematic beliefs. Unfortunately, I had not quite caught on to it at this point, even though a lot of people had been saying it out loud for years, that there's a lot of racism within the Harry Potter books, sexism, fat phobia, all sorts of stuff, and I was blinded by the fact that I really, really just enjoyed the books, and they had a special place in my heart from growing up with them, reading them with my mom and my sister. A lot of people have this kind of story. Since I brought it up here and I didn't make that caveat, I think I needed to explain it now that I know better. I still bring up Harry Potter because I think there is an allegory within the books. There's a lot of things that you can relate to these stories, and because it is such a cultural phenomenon, a lot of people understand that allegory. And I do think that in some ways you can separate the art from the artist, the book from the writer. It's a lot harder when the artist is still alive and actively continuing to spread their hateful ideology and their bigotry, as J.K. Rowling continues to do, continues to harm the communities that have found solace in her books previously, and in particular the trans community. I think it's important to at least bring that up and talk about it here, since I didn't do that then. But I also wanted to mention that this example that I brought up with the purebloods in Harry Potter, and how J.K. Rowling wrote about how bad that was, that there were certain people in the story who believed that people who were muggle-born shouldn't be allowed to practice witchcraft or be part of the witchcraft and wizardry community. And I do think that that's interesting and hypocritical when she is currently being that person who wants to exclude people from her activism, because she excludes trans women from her activism for women's rights. So there's some hypocrisy there with the things that she wrote and the actions that she takes. But other than that, let's see what else I was going to say and see what else I want, if there's anything I want to add to it. And I also think that it ostracizes people who don't necessarily know their family. Or maybe you've either been orphaned or you've severed ties with your family for whatever reason, and you wouldn't know if they were witches, or you wouldn't know your heritage because you've lost that connection. And that would be a real shame if you weren't allowed to delve into this world because you didn't know your family. And I think witchcraft can be a really healing tool and practice to heal those wounds. And it's a way to find a new family. So how horrible would that be if you weren't allowed to join a group like this one where you can find a whole new family just because you didn't have a magical family in your heritage? Yeah, I think that that's important. I think I said this, but I want to make sure that I think I said this back then, but I want to make sure that I say it now in case I didn't. There are traditions, there are family heritage practices that you might not be able to engage in because they are closed and just for people within that particular family. But all of witchcraft isn't closed to people who don't have witches in their family. And the other thing that I think is important about this is that sometimes people who are from a family of witches, not always, so I don't want to make a blanket statement, but I have noticed that some people have this like superiority, that they're better because their family is a long line of witches. And I think what's important to remember is that if you grew up in a family of witches, then you have more experience, you have more confidence perhaps, because you that's what you've been surrounded with your whole life, and you're not starting from scratch as an adult or as a teenager. That's been your experience from babydom. So I don't think that it makes somebody a better witch in terms of like more of a witch if they're born into a family of witches. It just means that you have more experience. And one analogy that I like to bring up with this is I grew up with my parents both being very interested in plants and gardening and growing food. And so that's something that I already have a knowledge base for as an adult, growing my own garden. I already have their experience and my experience as a child watching them and helping them to back me up as I grow a garden in my home now. Somebody who didn't grow up with a garden, who maybe had lived in an apartment, or maybe their parents weren't interested in growing food in their yard, growing vegetables and fruits and things, doesn't have that same knowledge base because their parents didn't teach them and they didn't have the opportunity to learn about it as a child. So they're starting from square one as an adult if they decided they wanted to grow a vegetable garden. It's the same thing with witchcraft. If you grew up in a family of witches, then that's just like your worldview is rooted in a system of magic. Whereas somebody who grew up in a Christian household or without religion or without any sort of spiritual practices or witchcraft is starting from square one when they decide to start practicing witchcraft. So it doesn't necessarily make somebody better or more of a witch if they grew up in a family of witches. It just there's just more experience and there's more support in that to help them with their practice. The next one is about black and white magic. Some people have this idea that there is what's called black magic and what's called white magic, or there's black witches and white witches. And I disagree wholeheartedly with these terms. I don't think there is such a thing. For one thing, and we're going to talk about this more later when we talk about blessings and curses, you really have no idea exactly what the consequences of your spell is going to be. You could have 100% good intentions for casting a spell and still have negative results or outcomes. Or if you look at it from another perspective, it could be a bad thing. So if you cast a spell to get a job, what about all those people who don't get that job? So you have to think about those kinds of things. Or casting a love spell that makes two people who are unhappy together fall in love. Or a weight loss spell that might end in a eating disorder. So all of these things, they end in, this could be a bad result. And how do you qualify if it's white magic or black magic? I still agree with this, that using these terms or qualifying magic in this way as good or bad, it doesn't seem very useful to me to do this. It's all magic. It's all neutral. Even if you have good intentions, even if you have bad intentions, it's hard to predict what the outcome is going to be. There's a lot of different people that it might affect. And so that's why I always recommend making sure that you are clear about who is going to be affected by these spells, if there's anything that you could do that's not magic, if there's something you haven't thought of, if you can live with the outcome, whatever that may be, if you'll take responsibility for the outcome, whatever that may be, making sure that you're really clear on these things. And I think we come back to that later in one of the later days in this challenge, but I just don't think it's very useful to classify magic as good or bad because it's neutral. The other part of these two terms is that they have racist undertones. So oftentimes rituals are mistakenly considered bad and are therefore labeled black magic, and it's because they come from traditions based in African folklore that is just misunderstood, or African magic that was just misunderstood by the people of the time, or currently. It happens in modern day as well. So there's this racist undertone of these two terms. So just avoid using black magic and white magic. It's all magic. There's the racial undertones. It's racist to call something black or white because, like I said, the rituals that are considered bad, like cursing or like voodoo type magic, is often classified as black magic. And that type of magic comes from African traditions and Haitian traditions. So that's just also not helpful. And if you've been following along with Witchcraft 101, then you've heard about the principle of polarity, which says that everything has its opposite equally at the same time. So magic is the same. It's a polar force that can't be defined as good or evil, even your intention, because it's a tool that you use to help you to create and manifest. Before I get too into it with this, I wanted to mention with the principle of polarity. I don't follow the hermetic laws of magic as much as I used to. They still influence the things I believe because they're part of like my introduction into witchcraft, but I also have learned that a lot of them have been watered down through the Kabbalion, which is I mean, I don't want to get into the weeds and all that. Maybe I'll talk about it someday later, but I wanted to clarify the principle of polarity because what I said is accurate, that there's the opposites are happening at the same time, but the other important key of the principle of polarity is that there's the two extremes, but it's a spectrum. So everything is on this spectrum, and it has the potential to be anything along the spectrum at any point, and that includes magic. So if you think about like light has a polarity of being completely pitch black, completely bright sunlight, but there's also this whole gradient of light in between. A light bulb is less bright than the sun. Stars have a little bit of a brightness. They make this night sky a little bit brighter. The moon is a reflected sunlight. It adds a little bit of brightness, but it's still dark at night. So there's this spectrum of light. Temperature is the same way. There's like cold, cold to cold. There's hot, 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 but there's a lot of temperatures in between. And so that's really what the principle of polarity says, is that there's two extremes that exist, and they have the potential to be anything in between the two extremes at any point. And so if you look at good and evil or black and white, there's all these shades of grays in the middle, good and evil. Yeah, there's these two extremes, but there's a lot of space in between of like a little bit questionable morality. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify what I said there because I didn't go fully into the principle of polarity. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. It has both of these things, good and bad, which are human made up words that really, what do they mean? So it's a neutral, basically. Magic is neutral, and what you're doing is, or what you will want to do is, anytime that you're casting a spell, to try to figure out all of the different scenarios, to figure out it based on the information you have, what is the best choice that you can make in that moment. And that's all you can do, and hope that you are making the correct choice, and then you live with that choice. But you don't really know what is going to be the results, so how can you define if it was a good or a bad choice? So I should have probably just waited until the end because I said the thing that I said at the beginning, like taking responsibility, making sure that you are okay with whatever is going to be the outcome. So then there's this idea of always being in this positive mindset, and this is definitely like a higher vibration, and we talk about your emotional state being a vibration, and there are certainly higher vibrational states that attract more of the same and the lower vibrational states attract more of the same, but they're all human and they're all valuable. And the best way to get into that loving state, I believe, is to recognize that you are human and to be compassionate with yourself when you have these lower vibrational emotions, and making your choices based on the fact that you're human and you can only do what you can do. Keeping all of that in mind and remembering that magic isn't good or bad, it's not black or white, it is neutral. The part about the positive vibrational state and the negative vibrational state, I liked that I talked about that we are humans and that all of these things exist and that it's okay to experience, the positive vibrational state as well as the negative vibrational state. One thing that I kind of have started viewing myself as a recovering love and light witch, because there was a point in my practice, and I think even in this video that we just looked at, I think that I was still a little bit in the toxic positivity, even though I recognize the value of negative emotions. And in this series, I do talk about shadow work and spiritual bypassing and toxic positivity, which we'll get to later. But I think I was still having a hard time understanding how to use the law of attraction and not be engaging in toxic positivity. I was trying to have those things happen, and now at this point, I'm not sure that it is possible. And so I'm letting go of some of those beliefs that I held at that point. I still think about emotions in terms of negative vibrations and positive vibrations. It's less about things being negative and more about things being unpleasant and pleasant. Because I do think that there are certain high vibrational states that can be negative. Like when you fake joy. I think that that's negative. So I don't know, I'm working through this now myself, trying to figure out how to define these things. And I think the best way right now that I believe in these different emotional states is thinking about them in terms of how they feel in my body, whether I enjoy the feeling or I don't enjoy the feeling. So like when I feel angry, does it feel good or does it feel bad? Sometimes anger can feel good. Sometimes it can be pleasant because it is necessary in order to get through the emotion. Sometimes it feels really, really bad and painful. And so I think it's not helpful to me at this point in my journey to classify certain emotions as bad, because sometimes they're really healthy and helpful to me, especially things like righteous anger, where it's motivating me into doing something, taking action. After Roe v. Wade was overturned, I was so angry, I was so upset. I'm feeling it right now, I'm feeling it kind of bubbling up, like a reprisal of that feeling, and it motivated me to take action, to donate to abortion funds, to write to politicians, to go to protests. There was a motivational factor in feeling those emotions. They were so strong, and I don't think that was a negative feeling. So those are just the kinds of things that I'm working with, is whether it's helpful to classify emotions as low vibration or high vibration any longer. So the next myth I have for you is that you do not have to join a coven. The myth is that you would have to join a coven, but it's not true. You don't have to join a coven. And I think this group is evident of that. A lot of us are solitary witches, and you might consider our group a coven in some ways because we support and we help each other, which is what a coven is. But also what a coven is a group of witches who meet regularly to perform magic and rituals. And traditionally there are 13 witches involved in this group, but that's, as magic has and witchcraft have become more mainstream, gets a lot more casual. There maybe isn't this highly organized type of group. It's much more casual. In some cases, there are of course still more highly organized groups of or covens of witches, and some witches find this framework to be really encouraging and helpful for keeping them on track with their magic and making sure that you're practicing regularly. And that's awesome. If it's appealing to you, feel free to join a coven. Local covens are really nice to have because you can meet people locally who can help you. But if you feel like your practice is something that you want to keep much more personal and private and something you do by yourself, then that's okay too. You do not have to join a coven. Everything I said there I think is accurate. Basically that you don't have to join a coven. You can be a solitary witch, that there are some benefits to joining a coven, there are some non-benefits. If you would like more information about the benefits, the pros and cons of being a solitary witch versus being in a coven, I talk about this in Witchcraft 101, which is my free course, as I mentioned before, so I won't go into it here. Just because that's already out there, and that's not what this video is about. But I don't have anything to add or correct from what I said there. Hello again, thank you so much for watching these first 6 myths and misconceptions. This is the end of part 2, and you'll be able to see part 3 very, very soon. Part 3 will have the remaining 6 myths and misconceptions, and my commentary as well. So again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in part 3.